Hey friends, today I want to start out the podcast with a short story. So, although I don't look very Swedish, I am half Swedish and half Italian. I've dyed my hair recently and am very tan and have leaned more into the Italian side, but my mom's side of the family is Swedish. And why is this important? Why is this relevant? Well, because all of your mitochondria come from your mother. And my mitochondria are all from Sweden. And the reason this is important is because Swedish cold northern haplotypes, which is sort of how our mitochondria are, they require or benefit from cold exposure in order to function optimally. So, yes, people who are from more equatorial regions can benefit from the cold, but people with this uncoupled mitochondria like me are like, we need the cold. We need the cold to be healthy. And I have historically avoided the cold my entire life. I grew up on Long Island, New York. Sometimes my accent comes out, and I, as soon as I could, moved south. And so for college, I went to Baltimore, was very depressed when I got there because I'm like, oh my God, this is not warmer than New York. And so when I went to grad school, I actually looked it up on the internet, and I saw that there were only a couple places in the US that were warm all year round, and Miami, Florida was one of them. So I moved to Miami, Florida, and lived there for 15 years in Florida. And then I moved to Austin, Texas, which is also very, very warm. All of this to tell you that I have actively avoided getting cold my entire life. Many people who know me from up north know that I hate the cold. And so it is with that energy that I am bringing you a conversation all about cold, because I am realizing that I need to get cold. And so when I was at the Return to Nature retreat in Tennessee this past summer, I met someone named Professor Thomas Seager. And I told him about my Swedish mitochondria and that I've actively avoided cold my whole life. And he said to me, "You are a Hashimoto's diagnosis waiting to happen." And I have not forgotten that. And I'm like, we have to get you on the podcast because I have to talk about this. I have to talk about why I keep hearing all over social media that cold plunging is so bad for women. It's so bad for your thyroid. And yet, Tom has compelling evidence and rigorous scientific studies that show, and a lot of in person testimonials, that getting cold is actually amazing for your thyroid, for your metabolism, for your fertility, for female health, for hormonal health, for both men and women. So I had to bring Tom on the podcast because I saw his presentation at Return to Nature, and I left that retreat saying to myself, the number one thing that I need to prioritize in my life is getting cold, because it is just such a gaping hole in how I'm taking care of myself, how I am supporting my mitochondria, how I am preventing future issues from happening. I'm so excited to have Tom on the podcast. We just recorded, and he is just such a wealth of knowledge. He's a professor, and so he is very articulate, and he's got a great radio voice and has so much good information on cold. And my hope is that you finish this conversation and also see that cold exposure may be a giant missing piece of the puzzle when it comes to your health, potentially your metabolic health, maybe your hormonal health, maybe your fertility, maybe your mental health, or maybe a combination of all of these things. So let me tell you a little bit more about Tom before we dive into the episode. So Thomas Seager, PhD, is an associate professor in the School of Sustainable Engineering at Arizona State University and co-founder of the Morozko Forge Ice Bath Company. His latest book, Uncommon Testosterone: Cold Plunge Therapy for Optimizing Sexual Health, explains why total testosterone levels are so low in American men and women and what works to boost them naturally. He is currently updating his first book, Uncommon Cold: The Science and Experience of Cold Plunge Therapy, which describes the use of ice baths to heal from metabolic and autoimmune disorders, inhibit tumor growth, balance hormones, and improve psychological resilience. Oh yeah, I forgot about the immune benefits, you guys. I mean, the benefits are just, they are endless, because when, as you're going to see, when you get in the cold, you're supporting your mitochondria. And there's hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of mitochondria in every cell of your body. And everything in your body requires that your mitochondria work well. So you're going to see exactly how the cold supports your mitochondria. You're going to see the connection between cold and metabolic health, cold and autoimmunity, cold and cancer growth, cold and hormones, cold and fertility, cold and pregnancy. We dive into, and psychological resilience and brain chemistry and mood. We dive into all of it in this episode. It is one that you are not going to want to miss, and you are definitely going to want to listen all the way to the end, because we talk about lots of benefits towards the end of the episode. So Dr. Seager's expertise in resilient infrastructure systems and environmental sustainability has made him a popular speaker and a consultant to the Army Corps of Engineers and the Office of Naval Research. Nonetheless, his career is focused on providing the knowledge and equipment necessary to build psychological and physiological human resilience. So I have left all of his information, Morozko Forge. I also got a code for you guys, a discount code if you are looking to get a Morozko Forge. We talk more about that at the end. That's not what this whole episode is about. And if you can't get a cold plunge right now, I also share ways that I do it for the cheap in my bathtub. So you can get started in a myriad of ways. And if you are someone who has a chronic illness and you're like, there's no way I can get in an ice bath, we also talk about alternatives to full cold water body plunging to get you started on this journey with cold. And also, these strategies support the parasympathetic nervous system. So even if you have chronic fatigue, there are things that you can do with cold that can actually help support you instead of sort of putting too much stress on your system, because cold is a hormetic stressor. So we need the right dose of it, tailored to each person. And we're going to talk all about that in the episode. I'm so excited for you guys to listen to this. And I'm so thankful that Dr. Thomas Seager came on the podcast to share all about the amazing benefits of cold therapy. And it is my pledge to you all to be consistent with this, because I know that I am telling you from a place of, well, I haven't done this a lot, but I have done it some. And last week I cold plunged like 5 times. And so I'm working up my cold muscle, and I'm trying to practice what I preach. I talk about what I did last winter if you don't have access to cold. So, and then of course we answer questions about the nuances of cold plunging for women. I know that is a big one, and I know that you've probably heard a lot of bad things about cold plunging on the internet, on social media, but as you know, social media is a lot of sound bites. And when we turn things into these sound bites, we remove the nuance that is necessary in these conversations. So that's why we talked for over an hour. And so break this podcast up if you need to, but it's one that you are not going to want to miss, you all. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Thomas Seager. Okay, I am so excited to welcome Professor Thomas Seager to the podcast. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is a pleasure.
Yeah, we met in person at the Return to Nature retreat, and I saw your phenomenal presentation, which I just rewatched, and every second of it is blowing my mind, because as a metabolic health specialist, this is a huge blind spot of mine. And as someone who has avoided the cold her whole life, by moving from New York to Florida and then Florida to Texas, I'm actively avoiding cold because I hate getting cold. And maybe you can share why my avoidance of the cold makes me hate the cold so much, and maybe what it's doing to my health by avoiding the cold, especially considering all of my mitochondria, which come from your mom's side, are all Swedish. And so, I'd love for you to just kind of start wherever you want, and we'll get started. But why is cold so important for our metabolism? And maybe we can start with, like, what if you even live in warm areas? Should you be getting cold? So Yeah.
I remember we started this conversation in Tennessee, and
Mm-hmm.
we were standing next to the Morozko that I brought to that event. And I said something, I kind of quipped offhand. I said, Danielle, you are Hashimoto's waiting to happen, because people don't realize brown fat is not just for cold thermogenesis. Brown
Mm.
fat is also an essential secretory organ. If you go back maybe a little more, almost 20 years,
Mm.
medical doctors thought there was no such thing as brown fat in adult human beings. They knew that infants had brown fat, and the brown fat would keep them warm. They knew that animals like rats have brown fat, but they thought, by the time a human being grows up, there's no such thing as brown fat anymore. Then these Swedish researchers who were looking at cancer imaging scans, this is positron emission tomography, in which you inject a radioactive tracer of glucose into the body. That glucose is preferentially uptaken into tumor cells. And so you can image the cancer patient with this sort of glucose scan. Well, those imaging rooms, they're typically a little cool. The machines put out a lot of heat, and they have to be air conditioned to work properly. So these Swedish researchers were looking at these scans, and they noticed on some of them symmetrical depots of some kind of tissue that was showing up in the body. And they said, that can't be cancer. There's nothing about cancer that is symmetrical. We think it's brown fat. And the whole world laughed at them. Then somebody at the Sloan Kettering Institute in New York said, I'll show those guys it's not brown fat. And they looked at like 10,000 PET scans. And sure enough, 95% of them had zero detectable brown fat. But 5% showed brown fat. And this changed the way that we think about metabolism and the complexity of the human body and the way cancer works. We realized that adult human beings who maintain some cold exposure also maintain brown fat. Now there's you can get a PhD in brown fat if you want. Susanna Solberg did this at the University of Copenhagen. There's a whole new branch of science that is founded on this thing that we thought 20 years ago didn't even exist. There are several essential functions of this brown fat. When you lose it and you don't have those functions, you begin to slip into a state of metabolic decline. So one of those is the brain. Brown fat will, or is associated with, increased levels of neuroprotective factors. This would be FGF21 or brain-derived neuroprotective factor. These are the things that will help repair and maintain cognitive function. So it's funny how brown fat has this essential role in protecting the health of the brain. But even more importantly, the brown fat is in constant communication with your thyroid. It is the brown fat and the thyroid that work together to regulate metabolism. And so this is essential for you, because I don't know where you started in New York. I went to school in Potsdam, New York. So
I was on
way
Long
north.
Island, so
Okay,
not
so
not
as
super
far as
cold.
I'm
Yeah.
concerned, you're in the warm part of New York. It's practically tropical compared to where I was. But then when you go to Florida, and then you move to Texas and you avoid the cold, which is in keeping with the advice that you'll get from medical doctors who say, oh, well, if you're cold sensitive, you should turn up the thermostat. Or if you have Raynaud's or you have some other condition that makes you sensitive to the cold, then they advise you to stay warm. And it's the most terrible advice, because you will lose all of your brown fat. The good news is it can be restored. If you're willing to get into the cold, if you're willing to shiver a little bit, to ride that metabolic edge of activating your cold thermogenic response, then brown fat can be restored in your body. And when it is, it will take inactive thyroid hormone and convert it to the active form of thyroid. It will modulate your thyroid function. So I have readers who have either suffered from Hashimoto's or from Graves' disease, that is either hyper or hypothyroidism, who began a regular practice of ice baths and regulated their thyroid function to the point where their condition disappeared. If you talk to medical doctors, if you talk to physicians who don't know, they will say Hashimoto's, for example, is a lifelong chronic and degenerative condition. But it's not. It can be reversed. When you do things that support your mitochondria and rebuild your stores of brown fat, your thyroid will come back into alignment with the way it was supposed to be in the first place. Every human being, regardless of their ancestry, has the potential to recruit brown fat into their body by getting in the cold and have the benefits that, as children or as infants, we had this benefit of like turning back your metabolic clock, aging in reverse, bringing back that organ from youth that kept you healthy that you've lost because you didn't want to get uncomfortable, Danielle.
That's right. So, for those who may not know, what is the connection between cold and brown fat? And what is brown fat? So, it doesn't sound super desirable, but you're saying that there's a lot of benefits. So, what's the connection between the cold and the brown fat? And also, what are the glucose and sort of insulin benefits of brown fat?
What a great question, because brown fat sounds disgusting. It sounds like
Yeah.
something that every woman would want to avoid.
Yeah.
But it's different than visceral fat, which is belly fat, or subcutaneous fat, which I have so much of, the fat that's just below our skin. Brown fat is located around your essential organs. So this could be around your heart, around the base of your neck, where it will warm the blood going up to the brain, and even along the spine. You have brown fat wherever your vital organs need to stay warm. And instead of being a store of energy, brown fat exists to burn energy, converting it into heat. The reason that it's brown is because it's packed with mitochondria. We're talking thousands of the mitochondria. These are the little organelles that convert the food that we eat that is going through our bloodstream in the form of glucose or free fatty acids, convert that into the energy we can actually use. That's typically ATP, but when we get cold, it would be in the form of heat. So you never really, even Wim Hof, the most ardent practitioners of cold plunge therapy, they don't have a lot of brown fat, maybe 100 grams at most in the adult human body. It's not very much, but it's very metabolically active. So it's like the opposite of white fat. But when you need more brown fat than you have because you're starting a practice of cold plunge therapy, your body will create new mitochondria in some of your white fat cells. It will convert, it's a process called beiging. It will convert some of the white fat into brown fat by adding new healthy mitochondria and changing their function from energy storage to energy consumption. So now that we know brown fat exists, there have been a number of studies that show brown fat, increased levels of brown fat activity are associated with leaner body mass. They're associated with better metabolic function, increased insulin sensitivity, better brain health, longer lifetime. That is a reduced biological age, which is another way of saying reduced all-cause mortality. The essential role of brown fat in the metabolism was overlooked for so long, and now it's kind of like we're catching up by funding all of this science, but it's not happening for the most part in the United States. It's happening in Quebec. It's happening in Denmark. It's happening in many of the countries that were outside NATO before it expanded. We are studying cold in Finland, studying cold in Poland and the Czech Republic. It seems that the United States is behind the curve on brown fat research for the most part. And maybe that's why we still hear a lot of Instagram influencers saying that, brown fat in human beings isn't real or it doesn't have these benefits. The data disagrees with them. If you are afraid, like in your condition, Danielle, where you're cold sensitive and you know it, and you're afraid that you probably don't have any brown fat, there's a good rule of thumb to get started. You don't have to go, up to your neck in chunks of ice like you see me whenever I'm shooting a video. You just go cold enough to gasp and long enough to shiver. That might be 50 degrees Fahrenheit for you. Maybe you get into a tub of tap water and you've put a couple of bags of ice and you're cursing my name, which is fine. The whole time saying, darn that Professor Seager, I wish I'd never met him. And you get in and you feel that gasp
Mm-hmm.
reflex, and
Mm-hmm.
all the hairs on your skin begin to stand up. You get that goosebump effect, and you say, I wish I had never decided to do this. Stay in for a few minutes. That initial sympathetic nervous system response, that fight or flight reaction that you have to the cold, it will pass in 30 or maybe 45 seconds. You catch your breath, you structure it, your heart rate will come down. The dive reflex will take over from the gasp reflex. If you can structure your breathing, you will structure your response to the cold. Everything about you will calm down, and the parasympathetic division of your autonomic nervous system will begin to take over. We call the parasympathetic the rest and digest. You will relax, and then after a few minutes, feel the urge to shiver. When that happens, you know you've done all the metabolic work you need to do. Your body, without brown fat, will warm itself with muscle shivering. But that's also the signal to your
Mm.
nervous system to begin to recruit the new brown fat cells, beige those white fat cells so they can do
Okay.
the energy burning, make the mitochondria through new mitobiogenesis, and begin to reshape your metabolism. It takes about 2 weeks of every day getting into the cold plunge for you to recruit that new brown fat and acclimate yourself to the cold. After that, you can go a little colder and a little colder and a little colder, and you won't have to stay in long enough to shiver anymore. Your brown fat will be activated by your nervous system right away.
Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful. So here's what I've been doing just to share my experience, because I know that a lot of my listeners are are women, and a lot of them, like me, do not like to be cold. We're like, turn up this thermostat, give me an extra sweater. And so I'm speaking to, I'm sure, a lot of people who have never done this before and who are very put off by the thought of this. So I'm with you guys for sure. But here's what I've been doing. So the tap water here in Texas is warm. I mean, it was like almost 80 degrees. So I fill up my bathtub, and the best thing I can do is let it sit overnight, because then at least it comes down to like 70 something. So it comes down about 10 degrees. And then I freeze big chunks of ice and go to the gas station and pick up a couple bags of ice. And then I use a kitchen thermometer, like a meat thermometer, to put in the water. And then I, observe the temperature. And so last week I did cold plunging like 5 times, and I got the water temperature down between about 57-ish to like 62. And so I got in, and I am a good friends with Kelsey Dexter. And I know you, she has a Morozko Forge, and we talk about cold, and she learns a lot from you. So she told me about the gasp reflex. And I certainly, when I went in, I was like, like it's definitely cold, but at those temperatures, to acclimate yourself, it was not unbearable. And I mean, I've been in colder water where there's like ice floating in it. I mean, we're talking 30s Fahrenheit, and that felt like knives. That felt so horrible, so uncomfortable. Like the cold was trying to kill me. This did not feel like that. And it was actually kind of refreshing and exhilarating. And I set my timer, and I set it to like about 3 minutes to see where I was at. And I did start shivering, maybe a little bit before that. I'm like, oh, I could feel this inner trembling. And then when I got out, my body was like, yep, it was time to get out. That was enough. And so I'm sure this is my thought. And I'm sure I'm hoping that this is somewhat accurate. But just like you would take someone who's never worked out a day in their life, you don't bring them to like the barbells. You give them like a 5-pound dumbbell, and you're like, let's go. And so we're working on 5-pound dumbbells, and maybe we go up to 8 pounds. And it's like, you see all these people lifting these heavy things and swinging kettlebells and on the cables and, climbing ropes and all sorts of stuff. But you're over here holding a 5-pound dumbbell. And so I'm trying to equate this to like walking up a staircase, as someone who for 39 years never got cold, that being in 62 degrees for a couple minutes and feeling that, oh, I'm glad I didn't push past that. Like I am humbly accepting that that is where my body is at, because I have tried cold plunging before. And I, like I said, I was in that ice and I was shaking and it really hurt. And then afterwards I had like this huge crash and I had to take a nap and I was like, wow, that was way too much for my body.
You've
So
overdone it.
yeah. So this is kind of, is that what you would recommend? Like slowly bringing people into the fold? Like it doesn't have to be a certain amount of coldness. It just, like you said, enough to gasp. But if 70 degrees is cold, you start with 70 degrees. Is that what you would say?
I'm so glad you brought this up. You're doing great, and I'm proud of you for taking on the challenge. A lot
Yeah.
of people want to ask, what's the optimum temperature? What's the optimum time to gain the maximum benefits from cold plunge? And you see them going after Huberman with this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But your analogy to weight training is perfect because there is no optimal temperature or optimal time for the human body. It depends upon your prior state of cold acclimation. So if you've
Mm-hmm.
done a lot of cold training, if you're Joe Rogan, you
Mm-hmm.
need those chunks of ice floating in the water to really feel that gasp reflex. If you're just starting out, like Danielle Hamilton, why would you expect to be able to do the same temperature in the same time as somebody who's been training in the cold for so much longer? You wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
You'd start with a little bit of weight and you would say, well, what's the right weight with the right reps for me? And then as you acclimate, you would challenge yourself a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more and a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more.
Yeah.
And we should talk about women because
Yes, please.
this summer, Stacy Sims went around to lots of different podcasts. She's
Yeah.
written this book called Roar, and it's very popular with women. There are women who have trained under Stacy and done magnificent things, triple marathons and double triathlons or whatever it is. Stacy is an expert in female physiology for extreme sports. And so people are really curious about, well, how do you feel about ice baths, which seems like an extreme kind of sport to some
Mm-hmm.
people. And Stacy went on Huberman and she went on Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO and she went on Mel Robbins. And she said, well, I don't really like ice baths. Now, if you go under the comments of the clips, which were sort of distorted and exaggerated, there are two kinds of replies to every single one of these Instagram clips from these podcasts. And the first set of replies are for women who say, I don't know what Sims is talking about. Ice baths have saved my life. I used to be depressed and now, I feel great. Or I've lost 25 pounds since I, since started doing ice baths and got serious about myself. How could it be bad for me? And
Mm-hmm.
the other set of comments say, I knew it. That's why I've never done an ice bath and I never will. So
Yeah.
nobody knows who to believe. Sims cites research that has shown women as a population are more sensitive to cold than men are. And in particular, this research measured the temperature at which women began to feel like they needed to shiver and compared it to men. That research was done at the Lithuanian Sports University by friends of mine. In particular, Rima Solianic did it as part of her doctoral dissertation. And so she took Lithuanian men and women and she put them in a cold plunge and compared their responses and discovered that as a population, women are slightly more sensitive. But then Sims exaggerated this and said, well, if that's true of Lithuanian women compared to the Lithuanian men in this study, then it must be something biological about women that is more sensitive. And that's not true at all. Women do great in the cold. Women have more subcutaneous fat. That is more insulation as a population than men do. And a cold trained woman can kick an untrained man's butt in the ice bath. What this really tells us that in Lithuania, men generally have more experience with cold than women do. Men
Mm-hmm.
work the outdoor jobs. Men are the garbage collectors. Men are the mail carriers. Men are the lumberjacks. And as a population, they have more cold acclimation going on than
Mm.
women do. There is nothing about female physiology that cannot benefit from or adapt to the cold. And the irony is that one of the things Sims wrote in her book, Roar, is that the same thing is true of women and men when it comes to weight training. Female muscles and male muscles are the same. Men happen to have bigger skeletons, denser bones, and more muscle. But the muscle tissue in a woman does the same thing that the muscle tissue in a man does. As a population, women are less weight trained than men, and they respond to weight training faster. They will gain muscle strength faster, even if they never reach the same peak as a man does. They respond to training because they are, as a population, less well trained. The same thing is true of cold. And it's not that Sims ignores the benefits of cold plunge therapy for women. She actually talks about a study going on in Adelaide, Australia, showing that cold plunge therapy can resolve endometriosis. So in endometriosis, there are cells that are the uterine lining. That is, these are lining cells that are supposed to be inside the uterus, but they're growing outside. And this is entirely disordered. It leads to very painful menstrual cramps. When you put a woman in the cold, those exterior cells disappear and the pain of endometriosis is resolved. It's just one of the sort of female specific aspects of cold plunge therapy that can be very beneficial. There's also increased fertility. There are a whole myriad of health benefits that confer to women. One of those in particular is that cold plunge therapy during pregnancy is associated with better birth outcomes. So I wish that on these podcasts, Sims, who's never done any original research in cold plunge therapy, was talking about these benefits instead of talking about how uncomfortable it can make you. I mean, if you can run 100-mile marathon, what are you worried about being in a ice bath for 3 minutes for? You're not. But because women don't want to hear that they have to do the really hard things, there are a ton of likes right now on any post that will bash ice baths. Look, if a cucumber facial and a day at the spa was going to cure your cancer, then I'd be writing articles about that. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think that on Instagram and social media, there's a lot of demonization of things that need to have more nuance with them. So, for example, certain stressors like the sun. So it's like, don't get in the sun. It's going to burn you and kill you and give you cancer. So just avoid it altogether. Don't ever do ketosis. Women should never do ketosis. Women should never cut carbs. Women should never do ice baths. There's a lot of this never. And I think that it's coming from a place of maybe some people have tried it and they've overdone it or done it in a way that was, they copied a man's protocol or something like that. We didn't, it was like, oh, we fasted every single day and skipped breakfast and did OMAD and we did cold plunges and we did HIIT workouts. And then, yeah, you burn yourself out. You go into, like your leptin's on the floor, your cortisol is tanked, your blood sugar is crashing. Like these are a lot of the people that I see are the people who have maybe overdone things and not nuanced it to their own health status at the time, their current physiology. They didn't link it with menstrual cycles. So I think that I agree with the fact that there's so many things on social media that are just downplaying things when we really need to bring nuance into the conversation and say, when is it appropriate for, how long? And it's like, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I also think that it was really interesting what you shared about the sort of humans and the theory of how we were in water and babies have a reflex to swim. Can you talk about that story? Because I think it's really, really interesting.
Let's talk about a couple of things. The first one is that social media, especially short form, lends itself to oversimplification. It's like a cognitive shortcut. Instead of thinking, well, sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that, social media leads us to believe that it's always one thing all the time. And that way we don't have to think about it anymore. We can just scroll on to the next 30-second reel. And that's a bunch of garbage. The fact is that human beings were built for feasting and for fasting. They were built for exercising and for resting. They were built for light and for dark, for hot and for cold. We need both of everything in our lives. I heard you say in Tennessee, winter and summer. And so if someone on social media says, well, ketosis was great for me, I lost 30 pounds on a keto diet. We think we're supposed to be keto all the time. We ignore the fact that our ancestors never would have given up blueberries in the summertime.
No way.
That there is a season, there is a cycle for human life. And that gets us back to the fundamentals of human anatomy. We as a population were shaped by some of the difficult events that our ancient ancestors had to cope with. I realized, I don't know, a couple of months ago, what my grandparents considered hardship, I now do for therapy. If my granddad was outside in Maine chopping wood so that he could keep the home warm during the winter, he considered that a hardship. Now we got Instagram videos of men chopping wood because they want to get their testosterone up. I guess that wasn't my granddad's problem. We now do, for therapy, what our ancestors used to consider hardship. And who can blame them? One of the most difficult things that the human race ever faced was the Ice Age. Now, regardless of your views on creation and evolution, the oldest human fossils ever discovered are in East Africa. And so it might, cause you to wonder, Tom, what about human physiology would be benefited by the cold? The East Africa's on the equator, If you go back far enough and we were all equatorial creatures, then why should anyone who's, people didn't come from Sweden or something, ever need the cold? But the fact is, there are 3 active glaciers to this day in East Africa. Where does Wim Hof take his trainees? Up Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. During the Ice Age, anthropologists estimate that the total human population, all of the Earth, was about 4,000 people. And they were packed between the glaciers that came down the mountaintops and the ocean. How did they live? 70,000 years ago, there was a volcanic eruption that plunged the entire Earth into darkness for 4 years. There were no crops. The animals that would forage were starving. How did our ancient ancestors live in that cold, dark world? They foraged in the water. Why do we walk upright when the apes with whom we share, 99% of our DNA, they ambulate around on all fours? We walk upright so that we can wade, so that we can go into the water and spear or catch the fish or forage for the shellfish and the plants there. Why do we have any of this subcutaneous fat? Chimpanzees and bonobos, they don't have that. They're ripped. And here I am, still wishing that I had abs or something. Like dolphins or manatee, we have this fat right underneath our skin to keep ourselves warm in the water. And why do our nostrils point down instead of out like so many other, the apes all have nostrils going out, but our nostrils point down so that we can dive into the water without the cold going straight up our nose and freezing our brains. So all of these sort of anatomical details that prepare us to survive the cold are now endowed by our ancient grandmothers because they never would have made it through the Ice Age without it. But here's the kicker. Human babies are born with an instinct to swim. When we come out of the womb as newborns, we have these rhythmic swimming motions. We know to hold our breath, and we know to find our way to the surface. Now, Danielle, why is that? And it is because our ancient grandmothers gave birth in the water. That water was cold. It is, I don't have any experiences with myself, but it is painful to give birth. And the water helps take that pain away. Modern studies of water births have shown this, that the water has an analgesic effect. When you go into the water, it helps with labor and it helps reduce the pain. The baby came out underwater in the cold and swam its way to the top. There is no other more convincing evidence for me that human beings are aquatic creatures from as much as tens of thousands of years ago. It doesn't matter whether you are equatorial or whether you are at the extreme latitudes of Northern Europe. Your DNA, in particular your mitochondrial DNA, is wired to expect the cold. And if you don't get it, of course, your metabolism can become dysregulated.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So maybe we can talk about keeping on the theme of birth and pregnancy. We can talk about how lack of cold may impact women with who are pregnant and leading into the whole insulin resistance conversation.
One of the difficult things about pregnancy is that the advice women get while they're pregnant is still pretty bad. They say, take your prenatal vitamins and your vitamin B shots or whatever they do, and then they sort of let you go around your own business and say, well, you should get a lot of rest or something like that. It's terrible advice. Pregnancy is a state of physiological insulin resistance. It's Ben Bickman from Brigham Young University who explained this to me. He says growth hormone interferes with the action of insulin. So there is pregnancy and puberty are both times when the body becomes physiologically or naturally insulin resistant. Now, ordinarily, it's not a big deal. Your pancreas will kick out more insulin, still maintain healthy blood sugar levels, because this is physiological, not pathological. But for many women on some facsimile of the standard American diet, as they progress in their pregnancy, so they're getting into the second or the third trimester, now their sleep is beginning to get disrupted. Now maybe their ankles are swelling. Now it's not as comfortable for them to walk, which is wonderful exercise for pregnant women. The physiological insulin resistance can slip into the pathological. Even without a formal diagnosis of gestational diabetes, the complications that are typical of pregnancy, this is preeclampsia, eclampsia, or gestational diabetes, are related to disorders of metabolism. That is, the insulin resistance goes too far. So what happens when a pregnant woman gets into the ice bath? She improves her insulin sensitivity, and this happens almost right away. She clears excess glucose out of her bloodstream. Her fat cells will release free fatty acids into the bloodstream that travel to the brown fat in her body, if she has any, and then are converted to heat, and she will reduce the inflammation. Pregnant women who cold plunge report to me that they sleep better, the swelling goes down, they have an easier time walking, which is good for the pelvis, helps loosen things up, helps burn some additional calories, and they are more comfortable. So I had to go to the library and look at some of the data. And sure enough, cold exposure during pregnancy, and we're not talking about extreme, we're talking about intermittent, controlled cold exposure, is associated with better birth outcomes. And why shouldn't it be? When you take care of your metabolism, you are taking care of your baby. So now we have several case studies of women who've had the courage to continue their cold plunge practice, in particular in their second and their third trimester. But there's one caveat. If you are seeking to conceive and you're doing ice baths because you read my book or you heard a podcast, you say, well, Professor Seager says this is essential for my fertility, and it can be an enormous boost for fertility. Most women understand that fertility drops off a cliff after about the age of 35, but it doesn't have to. That is all due to an accumulation of mitochondrial injury. When you take care of your mitochondria and your metabolism, you can maintain high rates of fertility all the way into your early 40s. So they're doing their ice baths. But right before you ovulate, and a lot of women who are seeking to conceive will track that ovulation, it's okay to take a break. Take 3 or 4 days off, because the ice bath will also activate the immune system. And if you're concerned about the implantation of the fertilized egg, called the zygote, into the uterus, then you probably don't want to super activate the immune system. You might just take a break for 3 or 4 days around that time of ovulation. You can start again later if you haven't conceived, or if you have, you can take a month or 2 off. You're going to be fine. Because you've maintained a good practice while preparing to conceive, a couple of months at the beginning of your pregnancy isn't gonna, cause all your brown fat to disappear. It isn't gonna switch you into, I don't know, some kind of metabolic irregularity. And you can pick up again in the middle of your pregnancy.
Okay. And so what about people who are at the end of their pregnancy who have not, let's say, been adapted to cold and they're like 8 or close to 9 months pregnant?
Go easy. A
Okay.
lot of women will be afraid that, oh no, the baby might get cold. And I want to dispense with that fear. Your baby is inside you. It is so well protected. It is the core. Your baby is not going to become cold just because you did a 3-minute ice bath. And the
Okay.
same rule of thumb applies. Go cold enough to gasp, long
Mhm.
enough to shiver. You don't have to be a hero at this stage of your pregnancy. I mean, you've already made it this far. You can do
Yeah.
exactly what you're doing, Danielle. Draw a
Hmm.
tap water bath. Drop a couple of, ice cube trays in
Hmm.
there. Get in and see if you feel that gasp reflex. When you come out and you feel the energy, when you feel that optimism and you feel like you've overcome something really difficult, you know you're doing it right.
Okay, awesome. And is there a time of day that you recommend to be in cold, or are there times of day that are not recommended?
I used to say, do it in the morning. And, Huberman just did this big video on cortisol. He called it the most important podcast he's ever recorded, about the 24-hour cycle of cortisol. And he drew a little graph of cortisol, which I thought was very clever since I've done the same thing. And he says, you should spike your cortisol in the morning, get into the cold bath. But the fact is that if you're a regular cold plunger, you don't really get a big cortisol spike from the cold bath
Hmm.
anymore. I mean, you're so well acclimated, you get a little bit of gasp reflex and you're like, okay, that was good, but you don't necessarily get the big boost in cortisol that somebody just starting out would do. So I used to say the mornings, and that works really well for me. But
Hmm.
some people swear by doing it at night. They say they sleep better. They say it's a good way for them to unwind. I expect that people have different physiology and psychology.
Hmm.
Now, having said that, I live in Phoenix, Arizona. Let me check my computer. It's September 1st and it's 98 degrees at 11 o'clock in the morning. We're probably headed to about 103 today.
Yeah,
During the
probably same
summer
here.
in Austin,
Yeah.
yeah, and with humidity,
Yeah.
sometimes I'll get in there twice a day, 3 times a day, because it's such a relief from the
Hmm.
heat that I experience in Phoenix. But in the wintertime, the days are shorter, the
Hmm.
mornings are colder, and I'll
Hmm.
stare down at my Morozko and I'll be seeing the ice chunks floating around, and I don't want to get in there at all.
Yeah.
That's when I really need to do it, when it
Okay.
is the hardest for me to do.
Okay. Yeah. And so you said that you wouldn't get like a huge cortisol response, but what else increases in your brain? Because I did some cold girl walks, I called them, here when it was like 35 degrees in Austin. And
Good.
I was in a tank top and leggings, and I wore gloves. The gloves really helped. But I was very cold and it felt very exhilarating. Like I felt really energized. I felt like I felt focused, I felt motivated, I felt something. So, can you describe what it is that you might experience even when
That's
you're
a great
adapted?
way to do it, is to underdress in the wintertime,
Yeah.
to go for a walk in shorts and a tank top. Your neighbors will think you're crazy, but
Yeah.
they already know that anyway about you, Danielle. So
Yeah,
you
they
don't
already
even
see the red
worry
lights
about
in my windows,
it,
and
right?
yeah.
You don't have to you don't have to get wet. The thing about the water is that it's so much more effective for extracting heat from the body. So I can
Yeah.
do 3 minutes in an ice bath, what would take you 30 minutes, walking around your neighborhood in the cold air. And the
Mhm.
compression of that time is
Mhm.
actually important to me. I get some other things out of the water. The ice bath is grounded, and I love my grounding therapy. I put a lot of
Mhm.
Epsom salt in there, so I'm getting some transdermal absorption of magnesium. And of course, there's ozone in the Morozko, so I get a little bit of ozone benefit that softens my skin. So I like the water, but starting out with this sort of underdressing and going on your winter walk is a wonderful way to do it.
Mhm.
What happens is a whole cascade of neurotransmitters and neuroactive chemicals are produced in your body in response to the cold. It turns out that they are all associated with feelings of being in love. So I have a whole chapter on this in my Uncommon Cold book, and it came out of an experience that I had with a woman that I was dating. We were in this miserable argument about blah, 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 and we were supposed to do a photo shoot. And we were supposed to be up in Sedona and get into the ice bath together, and we procrastinated like you wouldn't believe. Finally, the sun is going down, and the light is terrible, and my daughter's the videographer, and she said, look, you two, you're going to have to get in. If you're ever going to do it, we got to do it now. So we did. And there's, 3 minutes of video. You can see how much we hate and resent one another at the beginning in the video. But then we get in, and we're supposed to, hold hands and stuff because we're going to turn this into an advertisement or something. And in about a minute, she softens and she smiles and she starts cracking jokes. And I said, well, that's a little different, And at about 2 minutes, we're laughing and we're teasing one another. And at about 2.5 minutes, she leans in and she kisses me, and we start making out in the ice bath. My daughter's like, cut, we're done. You two get a room. This video is over. It felt like we fell back in love. So I had to go, to the literature. I had to go to the library. What happened? This woman that I resented, who I thought she never would have anything to do with me ever again. And now here we are like teenagers, making out on camera. Helen Fisher wrote that there are 3 brain systems of love. Now, I don't know exactly what a brain system is, but she said there is lust, so that raw animal attraction that you feel someone. And then there is romance, sort of that possessive, jealous feeling that you get when you have a crush on someone. And then there is the deep familial attachment. This is the kind of love that you have for your family members or for your pets, like that deep level of caring. All 3 brain systems are associated with different neurochemical signatures. And when you get cold, every single one of those neurochemical signatures is activated. You get increased testosterone, and that is the lust hormone.
Even
now,
women?
In women,
oh yeah,
women,
you're going
it
to say.
happens right away.
Oh,
In
wow.
women, you think, well, testosterone is made in the ovaries, and it is, but only about 25% of the testosterone in a woman's body comes from the ovaries. So even after menopause, when the ovaries are less active, a woman can have healthy testosterone levels. What a lot of women are never told is that they have more testosterone in their bloodstream than they have estradiol. Testosterone is the dominant sex hormone in women, just like it is in men. The fact that women have 10 times less testosterone than healthy men do doesn't mean that testosterone is somehow superfluous or it's not essential to women. It is. It is the lust hormone. The rest of the testosterone in a woman's body that's not made in the ovaries, it's made in the skin cells, in the fat cells, and in the adrenal glands. Yeah. So how are you going to stimulate your skin, your fat, and your adrenals all at once?
Oh.
You get into the ice bath. And that's exactly what was happening between me and this woman doing this photo shoot. Is she was getting this big testosterone boost that showed up at about 2.5 minutes, and all of a sudden she couldn't keep her lips off me. Now, men need to exercise afterwards. And you think about it, men make a lot more testosterone, but it's all made in their testicles. When you get into the cold, the testicles are not all super active. You've got to get out. You have to recirculate your blood. You have to rewarm, and then men will get a big testosterone boost. So the poor man who's doing an ice bath with his girlfriend or his wife, and she's feeling the lust brain system take over. He's like, what's happening? He doesn't know. Guys, just go with it. This is a good thing for you and your relationship. So that's the lust. But the romance, that's the dopamine. That's the adrenaline. That's the noradrenaline rush. This is the feeling that you get when you have a crush. It's like going back to 8th grade when you can't stop thinking about that boy and you want to write a note. Do you like me? Yes or no? And you can't stop talking with your girlfriends about who likes who. That's the rush that you get from the ice. And you might, I guess, confuse it, if the guy is lucky, with feelings of attraction and obsession for him. The third one, The third one is this familial attachment, and that is associated with oxytocin and vasopressin, both of which are elevated during a cold plunge. So now, the most powerful love potion that you and your partner could ever imagine is to get into that ice bath. Do it naked if you've got the guts, and feel all the neurochemicals associated with those three brain systems of love. This is, it worked for me that weekend. We never did another ice bath together. And I think maybe something in her was like, I don't want to lose control like that ever again. We did them separately, but never together. But I've seen this replicated in other couples. Couples counseling and communication isn't going to work. Just get into the ice bath, melt all those resentments out of your body, suck up the neurochemistry of attraction, and then have a great weekend together. It won't fix deeper underlying issues in your relationship,
Of course.
but it will set you up for a pretty good time.
Yeah, that's really good to know. My testosterone is very low, and it's another reason for me to get cold. And
Absolutely.
yeah. And so this is a podcast that specializes in metabolic health, blood sugar, insulin resistance. So I feel like we touched on all of those things, but I'd love to kind of take a deeper dive into, I'm really struggling with my blood sugar, and, my blood sugar won't come down. I'm insulin resistant. I'm doing all the things, but maybe they haven't gotten cold. And so can we talk about how it works, and then even other metabolic implications like with cancer?
Yeah. This is tough because a lot of the advice that people are going to get from their physicians, not Kelsey Dexter, but from physicians who are uninformed, may turn out to be counterproductive. I got a call from a friend who's a customer. He's doing everything right. He's doing his bicycle rides. He's doing sauna. He's doing cold plunge therapy every day. He's limiting his carbs. And when he does have carbs, they're in like whole foods and whole grains. And he's got a continuous glucose monitor. And he says, Tom, I don't understand why I can't get my blood sugar down below 140. And so I asked him, are you taking metformin? He goes, yeah, of course. My endocrinologist wants to up my dose here. Here I am, type 2 diabetic, and metformin is the first line of treatment. I have to take my metformin. And I said, would you consider quitting? And he goes, if you tell me to. And I'm like, hang on, I can't give you medical advice. All I can do is send you this study among elderly Americans who were exercising and taking metformin. The metformin undid the benefits of the exercise. It turns out metformin is a mitochondrial toxin. So it can temporarily improve your blood glucose, but it doesn't fix the underlying issue with your mitochondria. Most people, even endocrinologists, misunderstand insulin resistance. They think insulin resistance is the problem, and it's not. Insulin resistance is your body's attempt to defend injured mitochondria. It is your body protecting the mitochondria inside the cell from an inundation of too much glucose that is causing the mitochondria to have to overwork, produce too many reactive oxygen species that cannot be absorbed by the melatonin or other electron donors inside the mitochondria, and wind up damaging the mitochondrial DNA. For you to fix your insulin resistance, you need to fix your mitochondria. Now, there are a number of things that can help with this. Ketosis is certainly good for this. Intermittent fasting can help with this. Exercise has a small benefit to the mitochondria. There are even some foods like cayenne pepper that can activate your brown fat if you have any. But the best way to rejuvenate your mitochondria is to get into the cold. Once my friend stopped taking his metformin, it took about 2 weeks. His blood sugars came from 140 down to about 95. We did a Zoom call. He's eating a sandwich. And I'm like, hey, wait a second. What are you doing? We're supposed to be talking about your type 2 diabetes. He says, let me show you my blood sugar. Boom, 95. He goes, I haven't gotten below 100, since I first got my CGM and I was first diagnosed. thank you.
Mm.
Metformin is an answer to a blood sugar problem if you look at all the clinical data. But the blood sugar problem is downstream of a mitochondrial problem.
Yes.
And it is cold that will restore your mitochondria. Now we got to talk about cancer. You might have seen Thomas Seyfried. He wrote a book, Cancer is a Metabolic Disease. Travis Christofferson wrote a couple of books that cite Seyfried, Ketones, the Fourth Fuel, and another book about the metabolic theory of cancer. So Thomas Seyfried goes on Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO, and he kind of oversimplifies, but that doesn't mean he was wrong. He says tumor cells metabolize either glucose or an amino acid called glutamine. And that's it. That's all they get. 80% of cancer cells have genes that are upregulated for glucose metabolism. They live off of glucose. If they can't get it, some of them can use this glutamine. He says, when you shut down the glucose and the glutamine metabolism, you starve the cancer cells, and so you can shrink the tumor. Now, I have a number of readers who have written to me, and they've shown me their before, after PET scans, or they've sent me their labs, and they've said, as an adjunctive therapy, I started doing cold plunge. My tumors are shrinking. And this is wonderful news. There was a paper that came out of Sweden, I think it was 2022, where they took mice and they implanted tumors in the mice. These mice are engineered in the lab to die of cancer. They took some of the mice and they put them in cold air about 4 hours a day. And it wasn't like acute cold, but they knew they were going to activate the brown fat in the mice. And they compared those to the other mice who were the control group. And sure enough, cold exposed mice lived longer. Their tumors grew more slowly. They had better lives, healthier outcomes compared to the control group that was housed in thermal neutral conditions. And the researchers wanted to know why. So they did this incredibly sophisticated tests and dissection of the mice, and they realized that the cold was activating the brown fat in the mice. The brown fat would preferentially take up glucose from the bloodstream and starve the tumor cells of the metabolic substrate they needed to proliferate. I find this groundbreaking. Seyfried talks a lot about ketones, but he never mentions cold plunge as a way to manage metabolism. Where Seyfried is really strong is in explaining that cancer is not a genetic disease that occurs in the nucleus. That damage is downstream of mitochondrial dysfunction. Cancer is a mitochondrial disorder. Therapies that target the mitochondria improve cancer treatment outcomes. And one of the best of those is cold plunge therapy. So a number of people are saying, well, what do I have to lose? I may as well give it a try. Chemo makes them feel like crap. That's what chemo does. It poisons the entire body, and you hope that it kills the cancer cells before it kills the whole patient. And you don't always win that bet.
It's very
But
sad.
cold plunge helps ease the pain and speed the recovery of chemo, for example. There are some people who have decided to eschew conventional cancer therapies altogether. The most famous example is probably Dean Hall, and that's because there were no therapies available to him. He had chronic leukemia. He decided he wanted to do something to inspire other cancer patients before he died. And that thing was going to be to swim the entire length of the Willamette River in his home state of Oregon. So I wrote the foreword to a book he wrote about it. We've done a number of interviews. The Willamette is 189 miles long, and it is cold. It took him 3 weeks. He went in and out of hypothermia. But when he got out of that river, he didn't have leukemia anymore. This extreme metabolic, now I'm going to call it therapy, but ordeal, really, healed himself. It stimulated his body to heal itself of the leukemia that his oncologist told him had no cure. And it sure as hell did inspire other cancer patients. Now there are people reading about Dean Hall and they're saying, I have nothing left to lose. There are no adverse side effects. I'm going to give these metabolic therapies a shot.
Wow, that's so wild. And so my understanding is that this brown fat is sucking up the glucose, right? And we're building brown fat keeping it active. And so we're sucking up the glucose in that way. And also there is non-insulin mediated glucose uptake when we get cold. So basically we don't need insulin to suck the glucose out of the blood, which would lower blood sugar. And then there's an increase in, is it adiponectin, which helps with insulin sensitivity? Right.
You would know better than I
Okay.
would whether there's that increase in
Okay.
adiponectin. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just researched that the other day, but
But I
hopefully
don't
that's
want
right.
to overlook
Yeah.
mitophagy, which is the removal of defective mitochondria,
Oh,
and
yes.
mitobiogenesis.
Okay.
Cold is more effective for mitobiogenesis than exercise, than the right diet, than any other process of which I'm aware. So what that
Okay.
means
So, yeah.
is you have, for example, thousands of mitochondria in the brown fat cells. Well, to create brown fat, you have to make new mitochondria. Your body somehow knows how to select those mitochondria that have good DNA integrity and then replicate them so that more healthy mitochondria are being made in your body. Now, this is the
Okay.
wild part. You might say, yeah, but those mitochondria, they're just in brown fat, and they may be.
Yeah.
But this is new research that's just come out this year that shows mitochondria can travel from cell to cell. They can be swapped in and out of cancer cells, for example. And so it leads to a new hypothesis that the mitochondria you're making elsewhere in your body, whether that's in your brown fat or in your muscles, can replace or restore the mitochondria that are defective in the cancer cell and initiate apoptosis or the death of the cancer cell. Now, I don't know that. Fascinating hypothesis, and I hope that the NIH is going to give up its search through the National Cancer Institute for this genetic mutation theory of cancer and instead start funding the work that will look at the mitochondria and how to restore mitochondrial function to initiate the spontaneous destruction of the tumor cell. So it's not just the glucose metabolism. I think it is what is happening with the mitochondria, rejuvenating it, restoring its function, repairing it to its original role so that it can signal the apoptosis or the self-destruction of the cancer cell to shrink the tumor. That might be the more important mechanism.
Yeah, that makes sense. The mitophagy and then the mitochondrial biogenesis. We're getting rid of the damaged mitochondria. We're building more, and it's those mitochondria that are utilizing glucose and supporting all the metabolic functions in our body. So, as you said, blood sugar is very downstream to things that are, it comes all the way upstream. It's not the insulin, it's not the leptin, it's the mitochondria. And that's at the seat of our metabolism. And so looking at mitochondrial therapies like cold, that's why everything in your body can get better, because every cell in your body has hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of mitochondria. So especially like our ovaries and, brain cells and heart cells. So all of these organs that are really important, all of these processes that need to have balance and, intricacies, they're all supported by mitochondrial supports. And so there is a way to get cold without damaging your health, without burning out your thyroid, without taking you into adrenal fatigue. And so we can do this really slowly and gently. We can start with, what do you think about, there's two options that I want to talk to you about. We talked about cold air. We talked about cold water submersion, obviously. But a lot of people think, oh, let me just do a cold shower. And to me, that feels painful. And then also, can you tell us about cold face plunging and what that can do?
I have hated every minute of every cold shower I have ever taken.
Same.
And I didn't really understand why until I read a study out of Finland, and it compared partial cold immersion with whole body cold immersion.
Okay.
And here's what they discovered. The partial, like if you just put your hand in or you put one arm in, you can activate the sympathetic nervous system. You'll get the heart rate up. You'll get a glucagon release from the liver. You'll elevate the blood sugar briefly. You'll get that fight or flight response. But you never get the dive reflex. So in the cold shower, and you're letting them, shower, I don't know, I like putting it over my back. I tolerate that the best. Or maybe it's on your chest or something, and you're getting that revved up. That's why it makes me angry. I get that fight or flight activation. Only in the whole body do you get the parasympathetic response that takes over. Does the heart rate come back down? Do you get the rest and digest? And this makes sense to me. Now, when you put your face into, a bowl of cold water, which I think is kind of a silly approach, but Dave Asprey and some other people have popularized this, you can activate the dive reflex. And there's some good heart rate data on this showing that if someone holds a breath and puts their face in the cold water, the dive reflex will take over their sort of involuntary physiology. I think the best way to do it is in the ice bath. You get the sympathetic activation, which then gives way to the dive reflex and the parasympathetic strengthening in about 30 or 45 seconds. And one of the reasons that I say that is I've never seen anybody put their face in, a kitchen bowl of cold water and structure their breathing at the same time. It just doesn't make sense to me.
What about it with a snorkel?
Well, I saw that one in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And it does require a certain state of mind. When you go in there, the first thing that happens is you panic and you want to sort of hyperventilate. You have to calm yourself down, slow down your breathing, and structure it through the snorkel in order to get it to work. I didn't try it in Tennessee, but the people who talked to me about it said that they found it satisfying in this parasympathetic way and a good challenge for them to undertake. Me, I was busy with the Morozko.
Yeah, I understand. I have people, again, like baby cold plungers, if we're all new to this, and people who have more, I work with a lot of people who have deeper chronic issues and maybe some chronic fatigue, a lot of hypoglycemia, their blood sugar is crashing. And so they would label themselves as very sensitive. And so I think that a cold face dunk is a really good start, especially if it activates that dive reflex, because then we could get the parasympathetic activation, strengthen that before we think about cold water immersion, especially if someone has tendencies towards hypoglycemia, where we may get that blood sugar lowering response from an ice bath. So keep all of this in mind. If you're very sensitive to things like you can't go for a walk without your blood sugar crashing, I'm sure you already know that an ice bath is not going to be step one for you, but maybe getting into, even 75-degree water, it's colder than our body temperature, could be something that we can practice. But again, I've had people say, why did my blood sugar crash when I went swimming in a cold lake? I'm like, well, because it's physiology, because it's pulling down your blood sugar, and you might be someone just more susceptible to that. So we want to think about all of those things. But as we're healing, we know that if you have chronic fatigue, if you have some of these hypoglycemic tendencies, your mitochondria are really struggling. And often these people have thyroid issues too. And that there's just such misinformation on the internet saying like, oh, I have thyroid issues, so I can't cold plunge.
I can't cold plunge. It's my thyroid. The fact that you don't cold plunge is why you have a dysregulated thyroid. Yeah.
I love that theory. It makes sense to me. And I see it with myself. So I'm excited to get more consistent with being in the cold, and I will report to you what my thyroid numbers do and what my testosterone numbers do. And, just overall metabolic markers, although my blood sugar, insulin, leptin, like all of those things are very regulated because I work on those often, but there's other factors in my health that could definitely use improving. And so I'm really excited because it's not just about food. It's not just about light. It's not just about our emotions. It's about a combination of a lot of these factors and supporting our mitochondria in a deep way. And like you said before, humans have always existed with extremes, and that's how we adapt. And a lot of people want to say like, oh, well, balance is the key. It's like, okay, so you always keep the room dimly lit. That's not going to work. You're always eating like a little bit to not have feast or famine. That's not going to work. You're always in a temperature controlled environment at 72 degrees. You're not benefiting from these things. You're not stressing your organism enough. And cold, just like exercise, UVB light, fasting, all of these things are hormetic stressors. It's about finding the dose that makes us adapt and get stronger, not the dose that's going to crush us and injure us and make us feel worse. So starting slowly, building up, listening to your body, just like, and not looking for perfection. I have so many recovering perfectionists who listen to this podcast. And like you said, it's not about an exact degree, an exact amount of time. It's practice listening to your body instead. Like, was that cold enough? Okay, next time I'll go colder. Was that too cold? That took me out? Okay, that was too much. Let me give myself a couple days rest and try less. Figure it out. Listen to your body. Your body is very, very intelligent. Don't outsource it to a soundbite on the internet. Listen deeply to what your body is telling you. Look at your glucose numbers if this is something that you do, and track your energy, see how you sleep. Did you crash and burn after? Maybe it was too much. Same thing with an exercise that's too much. You kind of crash and burn after. Maybe you're exhausted the next day. It was too much for you. So do less next time, right? Amazing.
I'm so glad that you're tracking your labs, of course. Want to see what happens if you keep up this bathtub practice of cold plunge therapy and you're, making yourself shiver a little bit. Do the labs again, maybe 3 weeks after you've kept up that practice. And I'm very curious about your testosterone. If you are like other women about your age, you are going to see a boost in your testosterone levels as a result of starting a regular practice of cold plunge. Well, be careful what you say, Danielle. Testosterone comes with, a lot of other disruptive effects, but it will not masculinize you. You will not, get facial hair or something like this. You will be more energetic. You will feel more sexual. You will feel more confident. You will feel more competitive. What will not happen is it's not going to turn you into a man or something like that.
All right. Good to know. Yeah. And I used to have PCOS, so we'll see how this goes. Yeah.
That is indicative of metabolic dysfunction.
Oh, of course. That's what got me into the blood sugar thing. That's where I healed it with ketosis. But there's a lot more strategies. And I just find that, I healed myself of PCOS in 2018. And I was diagnosed in 2013. I finally learned about the fact that my blood sugar and metabolic health, I didn't know mitochondria, but now I know, we're at the root of it. And so I healed myself in 5 months with a ketogenic diet and circadian aligned intermittent fasting. But what I find now is that our light environment and our frequency environment is so much worse and I also think that there's just so much more collective stress and fear since COVID. And so I think all of those factors are making it harder for people to just get benefits when they're only looking at diet and exercise. And so that's why I'm trying to fill in the gaps with people where it's like, I love you so much, but we can't just talk about food. We can't just keep talking about macros because there's just so many other factors. Our mitochondria, they're not only energy factories, but they're scanning our internal and external environment for signs of threat and fear. So if we're living in a chronic state of fear, that's not helpful. And you just said that boosting your testosterone is going to make you feel more confident and more competitive. So it's really interesting that perhaps having more regulated hormones and these different neurotransmitters you mentioned that we'll get, that can help you become more resilient to the fear that could be keeping your hormones down to begin with. Correct. So really cool way of kind of seeing all these factors, all these things at play and come together.
Wonderful. Will you check in with me in a couple more weeks?
Yes,
terrific.
I will. I'm going to go buy some ice. I'm also thinking I might as well just invest in, I would love to invest in a Morozko Forge, but it's not in my budget right now. But anyone who wants to get a cold plunge, y'all, this is the best one. You talked about grounding and ozone and structured water and, all sorts of things. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the benefits? I'm doing it the poor man's way, but if you can get a cold plunge.
Why do you say it's not in your budget?
I don't know. I've seen some of the pricing, and just for me at
Some
the
of them
moment. Yeah.
are very expensive.
Hmm.
But you go on our website right now,
Hmm.
you might see a used one for $5,400.
Okay.
Now, when you do the math
Yeah.
and you're like, well, I spent
I spend a lot
$75 this
on
weekend and
ice.
then I spent, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you say,
Hmm.
gosh, $5,400 sounds like a lot of money all at once. And
Hmm.
grant you, you could buy a piece of crap used Hyundai for that much money.
Yeah.
And when you start thinking about the benefits in your life and the money that you're saving on the inconvenience of doing it the poor man's way,
Hmm.
all of a sudden it looks like a deal. Morozko
I didn't know
is
that
not
there
for
was that
cheap.
type of an option. And I'm glad that you mentioned that there's some used ones available. And like you said,
Exactly
I
right.
mean, thinking about all these benefits, the cancer prevention, the metabolic health, it's like an investment in one tool that's going to help everything and also really help with the consistency. Because I will say, like, I mean, there's a comedian, Nate Bargatze, and he talks about it's a really hilarious thing skit he has about buying ice. He's like, if I even have a whiff that you don't have your ice situation together and I'm coming to the party, I'm not buying ice. I hate buying ice. And I'm like, I hate buying ice too. And so
Yep.
I'm not consistent with cold exposure because of the inconvenience of it, because I
Exactly
have
right.
to freeze things, because I have to fill these up. I'm bringing ice packs up and that's for the birds. I'm not just like, okay, there's like, I have no excuse. I have a lot of an excuse, like, oh, I didn't buy ice. Oh, I didn't make ice. There's a lot of excuses that you could lean into. And I think that when you're trying to start a new habit that is uncomfortable, I think it's James Clear, the Atomic Habits guy, would say that you have to remove these barriers to entry. You have to make it desirable. You have to make it easy. So,
Yep.
yeah, really cool.
Morozko Forge exists because I hate going to the Quickie Mart to buy ice. I mean, we
Yeah.
just thought this is a big pain in the. We're engineers. We ought to be able to build a machine to do this for us. And
Hmm.
now I can go in 3 times a day. I don't have to like do this big preparation and say, well, if I don't stay in the ice bath for 20 minutes, I'm not really getting my money's worth out of
Yeah.
all this ice or something. I go in for 20 seconds if I want. It is there for me whenever I want it.
Love it. Okay, that's awesome. It's good to know that there's different price points as well for people. And yeah, really definitely excited to dive more into all of this cold
Good.
stuff and, really practice what I preach. Because if I'm telling you guys to get cold, I understand that I'm telling myself that I have to as well. So I'm practicing for the first time in my life. And
Fantastic, Danielle.
yeah. And then would you say that one of the things I noticed was that after doing ketosis, I wasn't as cold all the time. Is there any connection between ketosis and brown fat, or is it just maybe mitochondrial?
Not that I know of. I
Okay.
don't know.
Hmm.
You may have, though. Well, you certainly boosted your mitochondria by doing ketosis.
Yeah,
You gave them
maybe
a
that's what
break,
it was.
and that's a wonderful thing. You
Yeah.
might have been doing other things that improved your circulation a little bit.
Okay.
So I don't know. I
Okay.
think if you were metabolically dysregulated with PCOS
Hmm.
and you fixed it in 5 months with a ketogenic diet,
Hmm.
probably a lot of things in your metabolism got better. Probably
Hmm.
your brain, you probably got smarter as a result of the ketogenic diet, because everything about the movement of energy in your body is now improved. And I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised if cold tolerance was part of that.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Well, thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else that you want to share? I know you have a book. Can you tell us about your book? And make sure to link everything in the show notes, Morosco, and everything else.
I wrote a book called Uncommon Cold. There are
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of scientific citations in this book. And right now you
Mm.
can only get it at morozkoforge.com. Although I'm working on a second edition, it'll be up in Amazon maybe in another couple of months.
Okay.
And I put that out maybe a year and a half or so ago. And I got so many questions about testosterone that I wrote another book called Uncommon Testosterone. That one is on Amazon. I recommend it highly. There's a lot in there that is more than just testosterone. But what you have to realize is that testosterone synthesis originates in the mitochondria. It
Mm.
is no wonder if your mitochondria aren't right that your testosterone levels are low, because all sex hormones originate in the mitochondria. So this is a
Mm.
fascinating book about really sex health and sex optimization. Men can go there and learn how the process of vasodilation is fueled by mitochondria, and how erectile dysfunction is the earliest clinical marker of metabolic disorder in men. So yeah, you can go to Amazon. $35 later, you're going to feel a lot smarter about cold plunge therapy and metabolism. You can go to morozkoforge.com when you're ready to buy an ice bath, or you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, SEAGERTP. So Seager TP. If you want to, I don't know, put a heart on my rants about whatever it is that comes to my mind, that's where you'll find me.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate all this helpful information, and I'll be sure to follow up with my labs.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.